Hello and welcome. My name's Aisha, and I'm going to be talking about empathy based governance. I'll be sharing some screens today. So, welcome to this session. Again, this is empathy based governance. My name is Aisha. All right. Let me just get started in a second. I'll go ahead and share. Today, we'll be talking about empathy based data governance. What does it really mean? How did this even term get coined? I'll share a little bit more. Um, so my name's Aisha Memon. I'm part of Cisco Enterprise Data Governance team. I've been in the data governance space for quite some time now, and happy to be here to share some lessons learned. I feel like the data tribe or the data professionals around the industry have this need to be able to come together and share learnings, and also part of what Data Agility Day is doing as well is how do we speed things up. Apparently there is a lot of this overwhelm in the industry of how we go about solving these age-old problems. Data governance is not new. Data governance has been around for a while, and data management has been around for a while too. But considering where we're headed and where the future is with more, automation and more AI, ML, and the data insights that we need to bank on, there's this fundamental need to solve for governance and to solve for it now. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that and see if we can get started. So before we even begin, I do want to give a shout out to the industry thought leaders. These are like, I would say, the gurus of the world for data governance, mainly Peter Eichen and Robert Seiner. Just reading their work, a lot of the fundamentals of what they bring about data governance and the way they champion data governance as part of data strategy, I believe is it's perfect, and it's what we need, and how they've evolved over time too to continue to push the industry towards growth, right, and where the future lies for data governance. So I really appreciate their efforts. This session is not to give you a gist of how to do data governance. If you're looking for that, follow one of the thought leaders in the industry, and get some of their books, their writings. There's plenty of data management, book of knowledge, other things, other materials available that break it out into like a framework that can pretty much get applied to whatever organization you may be in. Data governance, to me, I feel like it's yes, there is a recipe for governance of how to establish governance, but so much of it has to get fine tuned to the specific organization that you may be a part of. Every area, every team, every organization has its own culture and has its own data culture. And so the job is again on us as data governance professionals in the data tribe, to really understand and live and breathe in that culture, to be able to embrace governance for what it needs to be, to make it successful, and to keep it going, right? To make it something that can achieve self governance, which is to me the self actualization, right? The top of the pyramid of Maslow's levels of hierarchy. This is one way to be just describing what the governance initiative is about. And so, yeah, I just want to give a shout out to the other, to the thought leaders we learn from, and hopefully you guys can learn from them too. So, before we get really started, uh, we need to understand our why, right? The purpose of governance. Obviously, there's a need for governance. A lot of times it gets thrown around as a project that needs to just happen and get checkmarked and done. But to really sit with this responsibility of what does it really mean and why are we doing this? I think I've spoken to some other folks in the industry. I've done some series of interviews to learn, where, how different organizations are tackling this. And I feel like without understanding the why, there's like a gap. There's a chasm of, what we're trying to do, what the purpose of governance initiatives are, and maybe a factor of why a lot of governance initiatives tend to fail. This is something that we together in the industry can learn, from each other. I feel like coming coming and really embedding this need to bring data as close as we can to the process and to the business, I think is something that we should explore more. um, at least that's what I see as examples of why we're doing governance, to really achieve business objectives, right? What's keeping us from achieving um, what we need to do, what we need to run, right? What is the business strategy? How do we align governance to that? That's one of the whys of why we're doing governance. In the past, we've heard a lot about, um, this question of like, where are all the data science and data analytics initiatives findings, and where's the capitalization of that? I think that's also a good reason of why we need governance, because we want to promote more of that. We want to basically be aligned with growing the business. So whichever ways data helps do that in this data driven world is your why. Um, there's multiple other examples of why a governance initiative is needed at any organization, and there's no judgment here. But I've spoken to plenty of folks that have launched governance from a very, you know, uh, compliance perspective of meeting the GDPR. I think that was a wake up call for us in 2018 when the European Union launched data regulation laws that everybody handling data from European Union for any employee, for any customer, would need to adhere to GDPR, and that was a good trigger of why governance is needed. And that initiative took momentum and shaped into this team that has to continue to evolve as more data regulatory compliance laws go into effect. That's a good why. At some places, at some organizations, it may just be the trust in data that is needed. A lot of times, data quality gets thrown out as another reason to do governance. A lot of times we don't want to reach a point of finger pointing of where the problem occurred, or why the problem occurred, or why certain metrics were not met, or why certain decisions were made. Having a good governance initiative in place, prevents a lot of those types of unforeseen issues or unfortunate issues that can happen. So those are just some examples of what I've seen as I've interviewed and learned from people of why they're doing governance. And it really comes down to you, right? What is your why of why you're doing governance? It can't be something like, oh, it's just fallen on my plate, or it's a hot potato nobody wants to do. I'm just going to get it done. Like it needs to be a little bit more deeper. And I think the more we reflect on where our organization is, where our team is at, what maturity level we're at, and what makes sense for us. There's, like I said, no judgment, no right or wrong. It's just a very good way to start with a purpose-driven governance. Um, and as we look around the world today, data governance is kind of like that unseen, lurking beneath the surface of all the other things that are transpiring. It's not easy to be in this world right now. There's a lot of pressure on teams, on initiatives, on projects, on data, on process, to achieve what needs to get done to keep going. I mean, there's a lot of these. We hear on the news right now, like supply chain debacles happening. There's a lot of things that are triggering um, uh, something lurking, which is causing overwhelm. And to me, it's like some things that we can control and some things that are beyond our control. But just being aware of all of these, like the pandemic, causing job insecurity. There's, like I mentioned, political environment. Other things that are happening that could be adding a lot of overwhelm to why there's a need for data governance. But at some point, it's also like that is why we need data governance in order to ensure that at any point, whatever it is that's causing the burden for the business can be dealt with from a data driven approach so that we have better control over what we can and cannot do in any situation. It's only going to be as good as what the data is. The old verbiage of garbage in, garbage out really holds true here. So having a need and having an initiative data governance, I don't need to sell it to you. I'm going to be preaching to the choir if you're already at data agility day to learn. But it's something to be aware of that it's beyond just the term data governance. There's a lot more that's kind of happening behind the scenes or could be on top of mind for a lot of the leadership, and it's added pressure. And so we need to kind of align with that. We need to be aware of that. We need to put a light on that and use that as momentum to gain the traction for governance and to understand the why of governance. Now I want to shift gears and get into some truths about governance that I've uncovered in my tenure. So, like I said, this presentation is not to teach you how to do governance. I think there's plenty of frameworks you can see in the world and find the one that fits your needs and apply it. The constructs of governance, be it the data strategy, the people involved, the organizational structures, figuring out the process, the policy, the standard, and also the technology that will come into play in the whole framework of governance. I think there's plenty of ways to do that, and it's going to be unique to you. But over the tenure of I would say a majority of the last decade that I've spent in the governance space, I've come across certain truths, and these are things people may kind of mutter under their breath or understand. I've seen people complain about it, but I don't see many people talking about what to do of these truths. Right? What do we do now that we've uncovered? There's some things that require more transformative strategy. How are people tackling it? And this is again going to be unique to whichever organization, whichever culture that's driving this. But these are some things that are brewing, and I'd like to go through one by one, kind of read them through, and share my perspectives. So, fundamentally, no one likes to be policed. It's like human nature, right? No one likes to be have this command and control authority on top policing every action, and that's the same for the data. The data users, they want a certain level of autonomy, and it's human nature. We need to understand that the way we message governance sometimes can almost make it a bad word, and we need to realize that. We need to be aware of it, and we need to understand that um, we have to hold ourselves accountable as well. And it's not the reaction to governance or the term governance that people portray. That's wrong. It's sometimes our approach of how we are presenting it at times too. So what could we be doing that ensures people don't have that knee-jerk reaction of I don't want to be policed or I don't want to be audited. Everything's green here. Move on. Don't bother me again. Like that's a reaction, a human reaction that we have to understand it exists, and we just need to be, not aggravating it or adding more to it. Governance is not a short-term gig. Governance is not like an IT project that gets done right away. Governance, like I said, it's more of a transformational effort. It's going to take time. It's for the long haul, and it's evolutionary. I mean, to me, I'm contemplating if it ever gets done. I don't think governance gets done. I think we move the needle. I think we improve upon things. We learn from our own approaches of what worked, what didn't work. Some organizations and enterprises are so wide and so big that it's a unique, like it's almost like the offering of governance has to be customized to the teams that you're offering it to. So don't consider it to be a short-term project that gets done right away. It's something that needs to be thought through and very well aligned with the data strategy, which again takes some time to not only develop but also implement. And you need to give it that time. and you need to be in constant learning mode and constant, feedback mode to make it better for the people that it's ultimately going to help, which is the stakeholders and the data users. Um, there's no avoiding this, that people think governance is like very fluffy compared to um, compared to some of the other work that happens around data. Obviously, analytics and insights, or generating key nuggets in data, that's what we're all vested to do. But when it comes down to governance, it gets watered down as just documentation. And we want to make sure we don't present a picture of governance is documentation for the sake of documentation. It's not. It's way more. What is the value added governance that we can, create as a balance for the organization, so that people don't come up with these perceptions that disregard governance or governance initiatives. It should be very important, and this is part of our messaging of what we can do better. Another one is governance tends to be, seen as a scapegoat most of the time. Like, hey, like governance is going to slow us down, right? I've seen behaviors, and I've seen and read about behaviors in, people watch that, the minute you put a governance policy in play, there's going to be people that are going to try to bypass it, and it's not wrong. It's not intrinsically wrong. It's something we need to explore a bit more of, why there was a need to do that. If someone really considers governance to be an obstacle, we need to have that sit down and that conversation to understand why, and how what we could be messaging and what we could be saying could be taken in a way that improves and accelerates what the objective is, which is overall going to be the same objective to, achieve business goals, right? If we're all headed in the right direction, if we're all working together to get to the same goal, then there's more chances of people, not viewing governance as this third party, audit, or something that's outside of what they're doing in their day to day. We ultimately want them to champion governance in everything they do. So how do we win those folks over? That's something to consider. And I think empathy has a great way, or something we can explore to kind of build that relationship with folks. Um, I've heard people say, and this is probably documented too, that it's not our problem to solve. It's like world hunger. It's not going to get solved in a day. So the more we open it up, it's like a Pandora's box. It just keeps going. There's so many other issues. There's so many underlying layers and layers of things that need to get taken care of, that people don't want to own governance because it's too much into the weeds. It takes forever, and it never gets done. But I think that's a narrative that we should be cognizant of. It may or may not appear for you in your cultures, but this is something that I've seen. I've seen in the past in other places too. And how do we kind of change that? How do we lead by example to ensure that that's not happening? Um, Tribal knowledge. There's wealth of knowledge and information in people's heads. At this point, we don't have technology to kind of scan that, but just as a governance entity trying to get this done, we can't blame those, or make it like, oh, the tribal knowledge doesn't get documented anywhere. It's not. We have to embed whatever we're doing as part of the workflows of where the process and data meet, in order to ensure that that knowledge gets documented. We can't add it as a task to be added on, because chances are those folks that are already, consumed with running the business are also getting tasked with documentation. And at that point, if there's already a fire, if there's already something that's pertinent to the business, documentation doesn't seem like the right thing to do at that moment. There's only so much bandwidth that some of these SMEs, some of these architects may have. So how can we make it easier to embed knowledge in everything we do? How do we create a culture to propagate knowledge? How do we create a culture to share more, and maybe have like more of this shadow system where people can learn by sitting side by side, and be able to help document and speed up the process of whatever it needs to get democratized. We can't just use that as an excuse that it doesn't get done. We need to find a better way to embed it. One more thing is like wild, wild west. Obviously, whenever you talk about governance, there's always going to be a party that's going to say, we need freedom. We need freedom to do what we want to do, but that's not the solution either. We need to find balance. Um, and the balance comes with creating like a revolutionary movement, I would say, like from the bottoms up, but then it has to get married from the tops down leadership as a mandate. We have to find that alignment. And I think that's one of the key successes of how to drive governance. Um, the best time to start is now. There's no judgment here. If there's no governance, you think, it's better to start now than tomorrow, right? And another reason or a truth I feel like is there is that lack of empathy, which I'm going to discuss and kind of share. There's no silver bullet with governance. We hear a lot about new things coming. Hopefully, in the future, this is going to be a problem we're going to look at and say we've already solved it. So I'm waiting for that day to come. So with that, we do recognize, like I said, there are biases. There are certain triggers, certain vulnerabilities that exist in our stakeholders that may be causing that pushback or resistance to governance. And we need to get ahead of that, be aware of it, and have strategies in place of how we are going to address them. We can't hide from them anymore. So, what is it as in this evolution of governance? What more could we be doing to ensure that those fears are addressed? At some point, it's just a matter of understanding. It's just a matter of extending empathy without judgment, right? And really understanding from the perspective of those who may be resisting of why there's a need to do that and how do we manage that perception. So empathy is not just sympathy. I know there's a lot of work happening in the industry, apart from just data and data governance, but in general, there's a lot of talk about empathy. And I've seen a lot of definitions of empathy, and I'm sure everybody has their own term and their own understanding of empathy is very personal. But to me, the one that really stood out is that we need to recognize our own fears and our own bias. Everybody has a bias, and it's based on the experiences we've had that has led up, to this point in time. And the fact that we can recognize we have those and take a moment to pause and step away from those biases to just communicate with someone who maybe we may be in disagreement with, that's fine. But the skill here is the ability to step out of that bias to be able to meet the person that we're communicating with where they are without judgment, without reaction, without speaking out louder. I think it takes some practice. It's a muscle that we can continue to develop. We can continue to build. I don't think it's ever going to get perfected. We see a lot of talk about it in the industry. So I think it's a matter of developing the empathy muscle within governance. How do we build empathy based governance that allows for more, um, freedom to embrace and a lot more of this autonomy that people want embedded within governance? So there's some things that we can work on, I feel, uh, strategies that have worked or that can work for most governance initiatives to make it more human centered. Um, it's understanding, like I said, the motivations and vulnerabilities that people bring to any initiative. How do they perceive governance, and why do they see it as something they need to defend themselves against? Um, we need to consider that ultimate goal of achieving business objectives as the one North Star that we're all driving against, so that people don't see us as something, as a governance entity that's working against them. It's something that's working with them to accelerate them to do their job better and to hold problems. We need to build, or there's opportunity in governance to be able to build a lot of partnerships and a lot of alliances. I put technology in there because sometimes you can get a lot of technology partners as well into the play to get the momentum going. Technology definitely does play a role. And we've come a long way in the world of governance with solutions that are automated, that are bypassing the need for a lot of, documentation. and things are getting semi-automated and more automated. So I think that revolution is going to continue, but we need to, use that as ways to create alliances, not to burn bridges. Um, we need to understand the pain and hold that safe space for people and be able to resolve that pain. Like, how do we fundamentally show up as helpers with that pain? If we're in a service oriented kind of space like governance, it's all about our stakeholders. What are we doing to help them? um, and there's no judgment of what has might have transpired in the past, of what may have happened. It's a lot of reconciliation with where we're at, being and just having an eye on the future. um, and self-governance to me is the way to go. We want to promote a culture where everyone knows and is aware and is educated and is literate with what we need to do, what the task at hand is, and we trust them. And it's a trust-based governance. And granted, there's a lot of this long-term, strategic, forward-looking aspects to governance. I think we owe it to ourselves to also break it down into what are those milestones and steps along the way that we want to achieve and continuously learn from. So they're definitely, like I said, based on your use cases of quality, of compliance, of um, just uh, transparency of where the data is flowing. Make a list of those non-negotiables that you have to achieve and build out a plan. And this is where in the agile scrum world, it really helps to have that kind of momentum so that as a team of data governance, initiative that are working on it, we don't get that burden or that burnout and overwhelm of, hey, I've spent so many months doing governance, but I haven't achieved anything. That's a bad feeling. And I really wanted to put that caution in here and say, be on the lookout, because empathy, without proper purpose driven and training, can lead to dark empathy, which is where teams just burn out and they feel like they haven't achieved anything. They don't feel productive. They're carrying so much weight and burden for the whole organization. That it's a very unhealthy and toxic place to be. So I know there's a need for more data governance practitioners in the industry to talk about this openly. There's a lot more resources coming up. There's a lot of great books that practitioners are writing to help minimize any impacts of burnout. But I mean, I'll be honest here, I'm very worried for the data tribe across industry, across sectors, that it's a huge burden. And I think we haven't really fully solved for it yet. We may be waiting for the right technologies at play to really solve it automatically. But I think the human aspect of it needs to get addressed. We need the people who are doing this job to be very, safe and to feel safe to be launching this and get through this transformation. So with that, I do definitely think empathy has a big place and a big role to play in launching any data governance initiative. Right. I see there's some questions coming in. Um, Feel free to ask your questions. I wanted to reserve a minute or two to see if there's more questions coming in. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'd love to stay connected and kind of continue this discussion of the purpose of what Data Agility Day is, to speed things up and to share our lessons and learn from each other. And I think we're all headed in this right direction. We're all in this together to really hone in on using data and gating those insights and doing what it needs, to do for the business, and really aligning everything together at the organizations we're at. So I wish you guys luck in your governance initiatives. I'd be very happy to stay connected and continue the conversation offline. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the Data Agility Day. There's a lot of great sessions lined up. Um, so yeah, with that, I'm going to be ending this broadcast soon. So thank you for attending and have a very good rest of your day. Thank you.